Good evening and welcome to tonight's virtual program. I'm Em, I'm one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we're thrilled to be hosting tonight's presentation. I want to start off the night with a couple quick programming notes on upcoming virtual events this month at the library. Next week on April 29th, the Rockland Shakespeare Society will be presenting selected scenes from The Merchant of Venice. And the following week, on May 6th, Dr. Lenny Reich will be talking about the Maine Climate Action Plan and what it means for Rockland. And so tonight's presentation is a little different from our usual talk. Rather than a single co-host, we have several poets who have been working with the Farnsworth on their project for Earth Day and Poetry Month, National Poetry Month. And they have a project which I will link in the chat and if you're watching on YouTube down below. And it is, they wrote a poem that is being paired with an item in the museum's collection. And you can check that out in the blog post below. And I will also add into the chat just here, there's going to be an event that the Farnsworth is hosting this Saturday, the 24th, which is a panel discussing sort of Earth Day and poetry with several of the poets who are performing tonight. And I will get started by reading off the bio for our first poet. Lois Anne is an artist, a maker of objects and poems. She has maintained her studio in downtown Rockland since 1984. Her work has been exhibited at galleries and museums throughout the country, and she is currently pursuing an MFA in writing at Vermont College of Fine Arts. And go right ahead, Lois Anne.
Great, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's here this evening. Choices. I try one of its apples, but the gnarled old tree has been left wild for too long. This evening, a doe and her fawn linger, finding delicacies among the soft, green-skinned fruit. I watch, hungry, yet smiling.
Excellent, thanks, Lois Anne. Next up is Marjorie Arnett. She is a studio artist as well as a published playwright and poet. Selected as one of Pennsylvania's artists of influence, her experience includes teaching at the Academy of Art, Zagreb, Croatia, a painting writing residency in Italy, and an artist in residence in Portugal. And go right ahead.
Storm. A dead, calm afternoon. Silence overflows with desire. A tiny leaf quivers. One brushes another, warning of a breeze that conjures a storm. Clouds roll in, pile up like sea foam building on a shore. The air darkens, threatens as clouds form an armada advancing on a plane of air. Water drenches as if poured from buckets, ripping leaves off trees. Jags of lightning stage a strange, wild, unholy light as the world kneels down in disbelief. The deluge continues, then trails off. The low riding afternoon sun filters onto land, promising pale moon fragments to come.
Thank you, that's excellent. Next up is Carol. Carol Willett Bachofner, award-winning poet, photographer, and watercolorist, served as Poet Laureate of Rockland, Maine from 2012 to 2016. She's the author of 7 books of poetry, most recently Test Pattern in 2018, and won the Maine Postmark Contest in 2017. Bachofner's poetry has appeared in dozens of journals and anthologies. And go right ahead.
Thank you. This poem is after Winslow Homer's poem 1873, and it's called 7 Boys. They row back and forth all day, dipping their feet and boasting of what they'll do when they are grown. Too young for work at sea, they harbor plans for money in the bank, their own ships to sail away on the tide, then row back in for mama's cornbread and chowder, and the tales their daddies tell about life at sea. They row back and forth, waiting for the men they're bound to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Laura Bonazzoli is a freelance writer and editor. Her poetry has appeared or is forthcoming in more than 30 literary magazines and anthologies. She has also published short stories and essays. And go right ahead.
Thanks, Em, and also thank you, Ellen, for putting this together. This poem is called Grace, and I wrote it 1 year ago at this same time of year. Grace. Across the field this morning, shoots of blue toad flax bend their slender necks in the wind. In the vernal pool alongside the road, leopard frogs venture toward the sun. The air is purpled with birch pollen squandered on the chance of encountering some unimagined flower. Last winter, all my endeavors died with you. The snow came, welcome. It muffled the road. But now grace shimmers in the pertinacious flax, the faces of the frogs, the birches in discriminate dust, as if it had been always our invisible companion, watching over our deep sleep and whispering us to light.
Excellent, thank you. Next up is John Paul Caponigro, who is an internationally collected visual artist and published writer who leads unique adventures in the wildest places on Earth to help participants creatively make deeper connections with nature and themselves. Get a taste of what he does in his Google and TEDx talks. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I've always been a fan of Louise Nevelson's work. The first time I saw it, I wondered whether it was painted or whether it had been burned. The larger pieces remind me of architecture, often altars. This smaller piece at the Farnsworth seemed less architectural, less, well, put together in a different way, and it reminded me of a landscape. And of course, there have been a lot of fires lately. The epigraph for this is a quote from Nevelson. My total conscious search in life has been for a new seeing, a new image, a new insight. This search not only includes the object, but the in-between place, the dawns and dusks, the objective world, the heavenly spheres, the places between the land and sea. Whatever creation man invents, the image can be found in nature. We cannot see anything that we are not already aware of. The inner, the outer equals one. So this in response, this, our blackened land. Is this the fate of all you have created? What once was simple, straight, whole, and clean, now unedged, roughened, worn, cracked, split, splintered, pitted, base burnt beyond recognition, as if abstraction would save us from the details of our damnations. By our own eruptions, one after another, everything falls. Coming apart at the seams, the chain is breaking, and the broken break more and others. So many collisions with destinies of our own making that we never wrote and still refuse to speak, but perpetuate nonetheless. Subjugated and subducted and subsumed, unselved and reselved, unselved and reselved, unselved and reselved. You'd think for all our inward turnings, there'd be an equal number of uplifts or an eventual implosion. Not flawless, preeminent exemplary, your unresolved imperfections are our prophecies. Ruin came before us, ruin birthed us, ruin is in us, and ruin will soon take us away, and ruin so much else with it. There's so much we could have spared, so many. Sand and dust, sand and dust, sand and dust, until our perfect form is found, or nothing is left. Plan no plan, unplanned architect of shadows. Dissemble not your fingers groping darkness in darkness. Take it all apart. Assemble, disassemble, reassemble, and remake us. The inner is the outer. Again and again and again, as many times as necessary. Through our destructions, construct a new fate for one are all. And if vision's unclear, or worse, there is no vision, find us in our reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Judith Carpenter. Judith Perry Carpenter is the author of 2 books, Piecework Quilt, Meditative Poetic Offerings for Each Day of the Year, and The Uninvited Goddess, a memoir, an archetype, and an invitation to greater awakening in these troubled times. An Episcopal priest, Judith was one of the founders of the former Green Fire Retreat House in Tenets Harbor. She now lives in Rockland and seeks to balance family life, the contemplative path, and a ministry of encouragement with her husband, Jack. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Imaginary journey. Imagine you're taking a walk. You come to a wood. What is it like, your wood? What kind of trees? Look, there's a path. Describe the path. Now meander down it. Tell me, what do you see? Wildflowers? Fallen branches? Do you hear any birds? Wind in the trees? What's the light like? As you walk, how do you feel? Now, what do you do? Stop to rest and look around? Keep walking deeper, deeper into the wood? Or do you turn back? Why? Let's say this imaginary journey is a metaphor. What does it reveal about your life?
Thank you. Next up is Kathleen Ellis. Her most recent poetry collections are Outer Body Travel and Narrow River to the North. Her poems have recently appeared in the Cafe Review, A Dangerous New World, Main Voices on the Climate Crisis, and Enough, Poems of Resistance and Protest. A recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Maine Arts Commission, she teaches poetry and creative writing at the University of Maine in Orono and coordinates the annual Poets Speak event in Bangor. She has taught poetry writing workshops at the Farnsworth Art Museum since 1994. And go right ahead, Kathleen.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to hear voices on Earth Day. We are celebrating a wonderful tradition. I remember when Earth Day was founded back in 1970, April 22nd, today. And it was exciting. It came, about 7 or 8 years after Silent Spring was published, and there was so many changes and things that were happening because of her publication. And some people say that it was Earth Day that really began the environmental movement that we're still experiencing, fortunately. I also remember when the Whole Earth catalog started to come out, and such a wonderful, oversized, wonderful magazine, basically, that was just full of all kinds of things that had to do with environmental protection. And they also published a supplement that was called the Whole Earth Catalog Tool Supplement. Maybe some of you remember it, which was also one of the catalysts for the Back to the Land movement during the 70s and into the 80s. And a lot of people who came to Maine came from the Back to the Land movement. And so when I was living on the coast in the 70s and 80s and 90s, I would commute up to Orono where I worked and still work. And I would pass on I-95 to my right, going north, this landfill that was going up, 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 and it was turning into this mountain. And I started hearing more and more about it and and we would close our windows as soon as it went by because the stench was so bad. And it was called the Pine Tree Landfill, and it was part of Hamden at that point, a little bit south of Bangor. And then eventually it was taken over by the Casella Waste Systems Corporation. And so we started calling it Mount Casella. But things got worse and worse. And there was a lot of consternation about piling up all of this material and not putting liners around. So the methane started to leak and was going into the groundwater. And yeah, so there were a lot of problems with it. Finally, they put a cap on it, and it now stands there as this little mountain as you go by. And so I wrote this poem called Conscious Objector. Beside the interstate, the mountain made of trash is not an ancient monolith nor aromatic. The yellow dozers crawling along its slopes push mounds of tires and mattresses into solid waste. Citizens were warned of making a mountain out of a molehill. The stench remains. No Katahdin tempting climbers to its heights, no eagles screeching from the summit, only gulls, gulls, gulls. There is no new mountain to speak of, even though the hills become the jest of our existence. Yet the argument is geologic, not political. All the old mountains are eroding. The young ones are ungrammatical and have nothing yet to say. And that stench we smell, that's just our fuming, the odor of detritus slipping underground. Thank you.
Excellent. Next up is Ellen Goldsmith. She is a poet and teacher. Her poems have appeared in numerous journals, and she is the author of No Pine Tree in This Forest is Perfect, Such Distances, and Where to Look. Go right ahead.
Hello. My poem is entitled Eggplant and Osprey, and I connected it to a painting by Will Barnett entitled Woman and Tall Trees. Eggplant and Osprey. I wake realizing I have no plans. How can I use up this day? Then I remember that I might have another cancer and toss out the words use up. Phone call after phone call. I tell the same story over and over. At first a release, then a bore. I peel the eggplant, arrange it in the colander, sprinkle salt to remove the bitterness. When I fry it, I'll try to control the flame to prevent oil from splattering. In so many poems, an observation of nature illuminates a feeling, suggests a way to reframe thoughts and actions. Like the osprey that perches in the white pine at high tide, sometimes finding fish, sometimes not, and still returning each day. This is the kind of guide I'm searching for. Salt to remove bitterness, a way to contain the mess.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellen. Next up is Judy Kaber. She is the current Poet Laureate of Belfast, Maine, as well as the author of 3 chapbooks, Renaming the Seasons, In Sleep We Are All the Same, and A Pandemic Alphabet. Her poems have been published in a variety of journals, including Hunger Mountain, Poet Lore, The Cafe Review, and Crab Orchard Review. And go right ahead, Judy.
Thank you. This poem was written in response to a painting by Dennis Pinette which he titled October number 13. Dennis is an artist who lives in Belfast, so that's one of the reasons why I chose that painting. The poem is called Benevolence. The path is not the sound we hear when we leap the ditch, nor the odor of mud that breaks across our face, not fallen trees or orange brush. The path is not the spill of doing and undoing, not the healing we seek in this amber land, a blessing of plenty. The path is not the light we know when we fall into another's arms, nor forgiveness, nor remorse. These bare branches do not hold the same solid warmth we feel under rumpled sheets. These limbs do not catch and hold, protect us from the rain. Still, they carry the price of everything. Steam rises on a pond in the distance. The sun tears open a way for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next up is Kristen Lindquist, who is a writer and naturalist from Camden. Her most recently published poetry collection is Tourists in the Known World, and she will be participating in the 2021 Belfast Poetry Festival with photographer Anna Strickland. And go right ahead, Kristen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coordinating this, you and Ellen. I don't know if you can see this or not. That is Sea and Fog by George Bellows. And that's what I'm responding to. I chose George Bellows because he painted on Monhegan Island, a place I spend a lot of time at. And I'm going to read to you a haiku sequence called Island Weather. And it's a sequence of 12 haiku that were actually written on or about Monhegan. And I want to preface that contemporary English language haiku does not follow the 5-7-5 principle that we learned in school. That was a big error in our schooling. And if you're Japanese, you might write in 5-7-5, but contemporary English language haiku does not. So these will not adhere to 5-7-5. And just before I get that question, just want to head that off. Island weather. Island sunrise, a light already on in someone's kitchen. Shore trail, walking into the surf's roar. Morning fog, whatever I imagine is out there. Fall as a verb, crickets chanting within the gale. Offshore breeze, the exhalations of seals chasing mackerel. Bleak sky, a soaring gull catches no light. Surf spray, a cabbage white flutters along the shoreline. Afternoon rain, porpoises slipping past the jetty. Island weather, intermittent showers of spruce needles. Storm surge, the calls of a plover diminish. Autumn twilight, the lighthouse beacon turns on the dark. A dark and stormy night, sharing our stories of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Wendy. Wendy Rappaport is a poet, clinical psychologist, and adjunct professor at the University of Maine Graduate School of Social Work. And her doctoral dissertation was Humor as a Coping Mechanism in Diabetes. Her specialty is humor as a coping mechanism. And go right ahead, Wendy.
Hey, thank you. And thanks to everyone. Wonderful people and wonderful organizers. Earth Day special, Children on the Shore, is this name of artwork after Waldo Pierce, who did it in 1939. He was from Bangor, Maine, and was an expatriate, but came back to America. And here's this beautiful picture of the children on the shore right when the war is beginning. So it's something for us to think about. What shall we tell the children? They don't know. They play, but with measured abandon. Or is that in the eyes of this beholder? I see the dark sky, and I don't want to warn them. Nothing should interfere with freedom to explore and feel all's right with the world. But I do want to shake their parents, and government, and businesses, and the very apathetic, and the scientifically delusional deniers. Innocence, delightful. Ignorance, inexcusable. Purposeful violation, criminal. What shall we tell the children? Enjoy. We have your backs. Clean your room, of course. And please remind the grown-ups to clean theirs.
Thank you, Wendy.
Pleasure.
Next up, we have Martin. Martin Steingesser's most recent book is Yellow Horses. For a preview, you can go to the link that I will drop in the chat. And we have a copy of his book, Brothers in Mourning, in the library's collection. Go right ahead, Martin.
This poem is called Tremolo, and it's paired with a painting by Leo Meisner called Cathedral Woods, for obvious reasons. Stand still, wait, under bowed limbs of a great father pine. Forget perfect knowing. Watch for the slow lift and fall of branches, how limbs sign. A tremolo among pine needles. How limbs sign, summoning, inviting air, wind for voice. I don't expect you to believe this elder conifer beside a 2-lane blacktop, rush after rush of cars speeding past would speak. Sorry. I whispered softer than a whisper, addressing the tree. I do that, meaning how I drive by or walk forest paths without a word or thought for them. And it comes to me, for all our engines and speed, I too am rooted here in an inborn longing to flower, not unlike a cloud of dogwood or apple blossoms. Walking out into new fields through lush, high grass, scattering a flash of blackbirds. Suddenly, there is wind. The cicadas lift their bows. There is a low moan as from a cello, a clear, wild cry beyond the woods. Whose hands? What fingers traveling the keys, skipping lightly from slender branch to branch? What breath among the leaves? Wind, what breath among the reeds? Whose hands, what fingers, traveling lightly from slender branch to branch? Among the leaves. what breath among the reeds.
Thank you so much, Martin. Next up, we have Elizabeth. Elizabeth Tippett's recent book, Say What You Can, in 2019, was published by Deerbrook Editions. Her work has appeared in anthologies and in many journals, and she lives in Hope.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you for attending, and happy Earth Day, and may we be able to make a difference. I paired my poem, which is called Green, with a painting of Lois Dodd's The Painted Room, which is this beautiful painting of a muraled room with bright curtains and this world outside. Green. Day upon day of rain, every rivulet and trickle, every stream comes into its own. Water falls everywhere. And now the wet fields suck up the sun and grow lush as the pelts of healthy animals. In ditch and bog, skunk cabbages unfurl, willows phosphoresce, wood frogs talk. One long day after another spills into each waiting dusk. Leaves become the size of squirrel ears. Now fish begin to bite. Everything sprouts on the tip of the tongue.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Next up, Kathy Weinberg is an artist who was included in the 2016 and 2018 biennials at the Center for Maine Contemporary Art in Rockland. Her novel Plan B was released in 2019. Her poems and short pieces have been included in several publications, and she is a contributing editor on the board of the Maine Arts Journal. And go right ahead, Kathy. I believe you might still be muted,
Can you hear me
Kathy.
now?
There you go.
Okay, great. Another one from a winter spent in self-hypnosis. Autumnal wallpaper inside an imagined house peels from the plaster. Out in the back 50, the forest. Inside the forest, foxes, wild turkeys, small deer and large moose, squirrels red and gray, the chipmunks, mice, rats, mouse rats, and the sound of owls among the endless columns of trunks and snags. Somewhere a stream, and during drought, a river of rocks. Somewhere a better world. Sometimes this is that better world.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Next up, Sandy Weisman is a poet and visual artist. Her poetry has been included in 2 anthologies and several other journals, including Salamander, Spillway, Barrow Street, The Maine Review, Off the Coast, and Muddy River Poetry Review. Her art has been exhibited locally, and she is the owner of the art space 26 Split Rock Cove in South Thomaston. Sandy is currently working with Maine Media Workshops to produce Objects of My Desire, a book of poems, prints, and images based on the concept of astonishment. And go right ahead, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Em and the Rockland Library, and thank you, Farnsworth, for doing the whole project. And thank you to Ellen Goldsmith for being the connective tissue between those two things. This poem is from the book Objects of My Desire, which is based on a quote, basically, by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, that we should live our lives in radical amazement. And it's paired with, I paired it with the photograph by Elliot Porter, The Meadow, and the poem is of the same name, In the Meadow. A faded red rubber ball of an old bug crawls among milkweed, nettles, vetch, and clover in my meadow. I breathe in the smell of dying fern, Queen Anne's lace, its spokes collapsed into fragile cages, the sedge brown and crisp as a broom. I love the way the old bug dodders among diving goldfinches and snakes without harm, for how it lives with disparate companions, how it moves over granite rocks and navigates the depressions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. Next up, Meg Weston is a photographer, poet, and nonfiction writer who pursues a lifelong passion for the geological processes that shape the Earth and the stories that shape our lives. In January 2020, she retired from her position as president of Maine Media Workshops in college, and immersing herself in poetry, she co-founded the Poets Corner with Catherine Sates. And go right ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. It's a delight to be part of this. And just looking through the Farnsworth collection was fun to do. And I found this image from Berenice Abbott, and I was very familiar with her work of New York and Paris and urban landscapes, but not some abstract images. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's a stop motion image of a metronome called Transformation of Energy. And that's the name of my poem. The pendulum swings back and forth as if the highs and lows matter in the end. The Pleiades and planets pace across the sky. The seasons cycle through, the days swing into weeks, then years, and time ticks by. Words from Robert Frost are inscribed on her grave. I rode up on one till the bubble burst. Words cannot capture the unmitigated passion of our too short lives. Each distinct day becomes a terse abstraction in black and white. Time continues without us, simply cyclical, energy that cannot be destroyed, not a linear progression to a foregone conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. All righty. Time for our last poet of the night. Claire Millikin is the author of 7 collections of poetry, including Ransom Street and State Fair Animals. Go right ahead.
Oh, yeah. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, perfect. Sound good.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to thank Ellen for organizing the reading and thank M. Lewis and the Rockland Library. Really appreciate y'all putting this together and including me. Yeah, so this poem is called Ocean, and it has a subtitle, Used to See, which means ocean levels rising. Here's the poem. I used to run races against a kid named Ocean and his brother named River. They were the fastest, but I always came in third. These hard nights of the plague winter, I dream of ocean, the Atlantic, its folding tributaries. If I go back too deep, used to see, water levels rising as the ocean warms, of unhealed rooms at the back of the ocean house, the terrible dream of transfiguration, rising levels of the sea. Ocean had dark skin, mine was pale. Before we were born, the South used to separate kids like us into different races, with River, his lighter-skinned brother, set between. No man's land, riparian territory, littoral zone. The ocean runs counter-current to human clocks, taking its own steps beneath the moon's drag and arc. Rivers meted at deltas, but the brothers were competitors. They ran it hard to win, and I in their shadow, daughter, almost strong enough, too thin. The place of thinking is the ocean. It's way beyond breakers, deep sand, loam, a maritime forest breathing still, breathing. Ahead of me ran ocean and river, their shadows deepening as the racing season ended near solstice. I ran in the line of their breaths. Oceans deepening will carry the earth. So, thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Claire, and thanks so much, everyone, for reading tonight. What a lovely collection of poems. And I would urge everyone in the audience to definitely go to the Farnsworth's site and check out the poems collected in that blog post with the images paired next to them, because that's also really something else to see. And we have some extra time left. So if anyone in the audience has some questions for our poets, or if our poets want to discuss anything else about their process, about the project itself, I'm opening the floor to whoever is interested in speaking, because I would love to hear more about this project and what people are thinking about. Hey.
It's Sandy Weisman. Is there any, I mean, it seems like it might be a great idea to hold on to this work and maybe continue it as you do, and or maybe you have from last year, and to create an archive of Earth Day poetry from this region, from Rockland, or from the Farnsworth. And I don't know if that's in the works or whatever, but and I was so impressed. And so I don't, I've participated before, but this is really special.
That's a wonderful idea. This will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, but we should definitely work on making sure that this is kept in perpetuity, because this was a really fun project. You're right.
And Carol here, will it be posted on the library's website as well?
Yes, both the website and the social medias. The website, yep.
Great. I enjoyed hearing how different everyone's poems were. There was the knitting together of all the poems by our common theme of Earth Day, but everyone's take on it was so unique, and it was like a long, cool drink of water for me. I loved hearing it all, and everyone, and seeing people I haven't seen for over a year. A big bonus there.
Yeah, can I go ahead?
Go for it.
Yeah, one of the things I admired, it's hard hearing one after another, keeping everybody in mind. But one of the things I admired is the way the personal and the global or the universal would come together in some of the poems. As in the last one I can't have good recall of is Claire's or Elizabeth's, and in Meg, and Judy Kaber's, is that movement back and forth between the poet and the environment. And also John's head-on. There weren't a lot of head-on looks at the negative side, the dark side, and it was really good to hear that. There are so many ways of celebrating nature which make an incredible protest, but we also have to look at the others. And that was a nice thing about the response to Panette's painting, because one of the things I've always, I don't know a lot of painters and paintings too conversantly, but Dennis Panette captures the industrial nature of the terrible things that have been imposed on our environment in such an uncanny way that draw us and even, capture some of the aspects of beauty in them, which make them even more compelling and lethal. And so there was such a nice mix amongst the poems. And that was partly a response, Em, to your question before we started.
Well, thanks, Martin.
So, can I speak?
Of course, go ahead. This is definitely an open discussion. Go for it.
So, I love the observations that people have made, and the light and the dark, and the quality of the concrete observations that people have made about nature in the various poems. So some of us are going to be on the panel on Saturday about eco-poetry, and others of you perhaps will come. And one of the questions is, how does poetry affect change, or how does poetry contribute to making things better in terms of the environmental crisis? So I just want to read, I came upon what I think is a great definition of eco-poetry, and I think all of our poems fit it. And it's by John Shopto in an essay he wrote entitled "Why Eco-Poetry?" And he says that eco-poetry is nature poetry that has designs on us, imagines changing the ways we think, feel about, live, and act in the world. And I think that these poems fulfill that definition.
Ellen, who was it that wrote that?
John Shopto is his name. And it's an essay entitled "Why Eco-Poetry?" I think it's available on one of the American Academy of Poets or website.
Thank you.
I'm curious, for the ECHO event on Saturday, is there going to be a Q&A period?
Yes, you have to register on the Farnsworth website, but yes, there will be a period for comments and questions.
Oh, can you hear me?
And yes.
I do think if poetry is going to affect change, we don't always want to speak to the choir. And so I think through the YouTube and various ways, because poets listen to poets, they support poets and writers, and it's a wonderful community, but how do you really affect change and get out of that circle and have the people who are fearful of poetry, who don't feel they don't understand, which is a lot like art and painting and contemporary work. So I think what has happened tonight, and that it is accessible, that it's going to be on social media type of thing, is one step toward not just the poetry community, but making change and breaking out of that. I think that's super important.
I think that's an important question, Marjorie. Last week we had on the Poets Corner poems of resistance and protest from the anthology Enough, and many of these poets were there. And it's a question in my mind that, are we always talking to ourselves? Are we always self-selecting that audience? And how do we create that conversation, with those who aren't thinking in that way? And I think poetry can be a bridge, but it can also be an obstacle, a barrier in a way.
I can't help it because this subject really calls to me. I think there's an underlying thing. Oh, somebody once said, standing on the shore, looking out at some islands, oh, they're all joined underneath. The power of language, and when I say language, every word means something, many things that it is saying. And one of the aspects of working with the language is listening to what the language is saying and what I want to say and how they weave together is when I think poetry and art happens, is when we're hearing something that wants to be said that comes together and harmonizes with something that concerns us personally. And this is very important because where does language come from? We don't know. It's been planted to acquire it in our DNA. And no matter what your religion, it comes from another world. And so you can't work with language, whether it's literate, good novels use poetry, the language of poetry. And if you're working with language, you can't help but be joining with something spiritual. And that's the power. It's not our power, it's how we bring them together, how we act as medians to bring together our personal and the spiritual. People are afraid of the word spiritual, and religion likes to claim its dominance in its work of it, but the love and work with language automatically connects us with the spiritual, and the spiritual is the heart. And the power comes from the listener. When they hear a poem, then we're connecting with something deeper and universal. And it comes from how we get connected through using the language this way, whether it's in a novel or whether it's in a painting when it becomes poetry. And that's the power, is when it joins us. And I think that's what we can do. The trouble is that when it's a difficulty, it's because of the prejudices that have been learned through unfortunate experiences with poetry. So that's a deep concern of mine, the relationship of the spiritual and the poem.
Thank you, Martin. That was very beautifully stated. And last year, there was an international conference online that I participated in, and it was on trauma. And the presenters in this international conference were scientists, brain scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, other forms of doctors, therapists, and poets. And the organizers of the conference were committed, and this is what drew me to participate. They were committed from the very beginning that poetry plays such a part in healing and in bringing people together. And there was also an element of it all with, this past, more than a year now of the pandemic, and how people have been affected, and how what was brought up is that more and more people are turning to poetry for some sustenance, inside, to nourish, their inner being. And I just thought that was really beautiful. And so it does seem that there is a place that, and it's being recognized in the broader world.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I really liked hearing what Martin had to say. I thought you spoke beautifully, and I loved the way that you really used your whole body when talking. It really captured me in, and I really enjoyed your poetry, and everyone else's as well.
Thank you, Gabby. Can she hear me? Am I muted?
I can hear you,
Yep, you're not.
Kathleen.
Okay. You just can't see me. I don't know why, but I'm going to just talk and say, let's get back to the earth. And I think also what everyone has had to say in this little discussion is extremely important. But to get people involved in thinking about poetry in the way that they think of the earth and what is happening to our earth is extremely important. Today, we have the president talking to China and to the beleaguered nations that might go underwater in less than a decade, some of them, the Philippines and what they're going through. And then at 8 o'clock, I think it is, if you go home real quick, you can watch Greta. Greta's going to be talking on PBS tonight, and she's such a wonderful speaker, and she speaks from this this young age with this whole world in front of her that is dying off in front of us, and to bring poetry together with ecology and the environment and for trying to save this incredible earth is extremely important. And to do that, you have to have what Martin was talking about. You have to have the heart as part of this whole endeavor. But I just wanted to bring up this incredible poet whom I recently really kind of discovered, and I don't think I got his name right exactly because I think he has 3 names, but it's Craig Santos. Is anyone familiar with Craig Santos? He teaches in Hawaii. He's from Guam, so he's a US citizen, and he grew up on Guam and knew what it was like to have hurricanes total the island at times. Members of his family die in tsunamis, really difficult things. But anyway, he now teaches, I think it's at the University of Hawaii, and he teaches a class in eco-poetics. And what he does is mostly, and of course he's in Hawaii where the weather's always nice pretty much, if it's not storming, he is able to take his student to sites. And so they are participating in whatever earth activities are going on as far as just blooming and growing and being and storming and everything else, but also make poems. So they're making poems, they're reading poems, they're also reading about what's happening with the earth right now, what dangers we're in. And so there's that combination of necessity and urgency in the poems as well as in what the students are doing. And I just think that is incredible. And I'm going to start doing that at the University of Maine as soon as possible. And I wanted to thank my student, Gabby, for saying those wonderful things, wonderful words about Martin. And I'm going to remember that you said that, Gabby. So I just wanted to get my 2 cents in about that. I think it's really important to not lose sight of what we're trying to do is remind people of where we are and how we want to stay here, how we want to stay on this earth. And we have to do it with both our heart, with science, and with poetry, of course. Thank you.
I'd like to just dovetail on what Kathleen just said. And I think, and add to that, which Kathleen well knows, is that I think our bridge to the next big acceptance of poetry is through our young people, and teaching them not just the mechanics, which fine to know the rules, but also exemplifying for them the importance of observation. And one of the things I used to do with college freshmen and sophomores is to take them to some natural place twice, once in daytime and once at night, and have them make their observations and and begin. They could only take a notebook and a little flashlight. And the flashlight was only to be aimed at the page, not at the environment. And they were amazed and excited about the idea that you can have a different feeling about a place depending upon the light or the silence or the sounds that are there. And I'm in touch with some of those students today. This was a while ago, 2004 or 5, and they're still doing that. They're now teaching their kids that there's a difference in how a place looks and smells and feels depending upon the time of day. So I think one of the things that we can do as our generation passing on to the generations below us or behind us is to encourage observation and encourage people to be in nature instead of looking at it out the window. Just go outside. Joseph Bruchac, who's a wonderful Indigenous poet, says that all the time, you know, step outside and just figure out notice what you hear and how the place smells. And I never forget that. So, you know, I'm always aware of those senses when I'm writing. So I think, Kathleen, you're right on the money with how it is that we pass things along. And you do a great job with your students, and I know they appreciate you. I do.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if we can have Carl Little read his poem, since he missed the reading here. If he could jump in and read his poem in response to a Farnsworth work of art.
Yes, I was just gonna say, go right ahead, Carl. That would be excellent to hear.
That sounds like a great idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry I'm late to the event. My wife made some cookies and that took a little extra time. So, but I did want to mention, apropos of some of the discussion that you've been having, is that earlier today I sat in on a Zoom event that was hosted by the Telling Room, this wonderful group in Portland, and there were and actually I think it was the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and there were 6 students reading their poems about nature, the natural world, and they were so incredible. So there's another generation coming along, the Greta Thunbergs and others. So it's very uplifting. So here's my poem. It's called Small Green Grass Snake, written on Great Spruce Head Island, Maine. A number of summers ago, I was invited by Anina Porter Fuller to spend a week out there as part of her art week. And so this is a poem that came out of that residency. Small green grass snake slithers through the grass, although that verb doesn't do its movements justice. Maybe glide or ripple or shape shift. So delicate, thin, moving up the path ahead of our footsteps. God or someone saw the shape in the grass and called it green grass snake, an easy ID compared to, say, Bactrian camel or nudibranch or ocelot, all part of paradise, which makes me think of the poor snakes of St. Croix, enjoying rain of a virgin island, looking up one day to find a mongoose in their path, which proceeds to rip them skin from skin, brought in to clean up Eden, a rikki-tikki-tavi nightmare for the serpent crew, a kind of injustice played out by man playing God, and the ghosts of those snakes rattled the dry corn shakes, while here on this island, a slim slider of a light green hue that wouldn't know a mongoose from a molehill heads off to the left in search of edibles in the northern kingdom of Great Spruce, where no one holds dominion over nothing.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Carl. I'm glad you got a chance to read tonight.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I've got to leave and I don't want to just become a black box. So I just want to say good night and thank you to everybody. And you, Em, and Ellen, thank you.
Good night, Martin. Have a good
Good night,
night. Thank you
Martin.
for coming.
Yeah, I'm going to take off too. This is Kathleen, and I'm going to go hear Greta.
I think
All right.
actually, if we're all set, we might as well close the night off for everyone, unless anyone has some last minute thoughts.
No,
Well,
thank
if
you,
we're
everyone.
going to do that, I have one thought is reach through the boxes and let's have a group hug.
Group hug.
Group hug.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you for performing tonight.
Happy
Take
Have
care,
a great
everyone.
night, everyone.
Wonderful.
Yes,
evening.
thank you, everyone.
Ellen, thank you.
Hi, Carl.
Bye.
Terrific poems.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Wonderful
everyone.
work. Good night.
Night, thank you.